All right, welcome to The Explainer, where we really get into the big ideas. Today, we're digging into a classic, one of the foundational texts of modern sociology, and the absolutely brilliant, but also deeply troubled mind behind it. We're talking, of course, about Max Weber and his game-changing book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism.
Okay, let's just jump right in with a huge puzzle, something that's really at the core of our modern world.
How did something as personal as religious anxiety, a deep crisis of faith, somehow end up fueling the entire engine of modern industry?
Well, the answer, it turns out, is wrapped up in the life of one tormented genius, a man named Max Weber. Okay, so to really get Weber, you have to understand this deep inner conflict that shaped his entire life and all of his work. And this conflict, it started right at home. I mean, imagine this household. You've got his father, a worldly, ambitious politician who really embraced the pleasures of life. And then, on the complete other side, you have his mother. She was a devout, ascetic Calvinist, totally committed to a life of piety and self-denial. Weber was literally caught between these two clashing worlds. And that tension, it defined pretty much everything about him. He was this incredible rationalist, right? Building these complex, logical systems to explain how society works. But at the same time, he personally craved this passionate, almost erotic escape from that very same order he was analyzing. He put it perfectly himself when he said, "From the cold skeleton of rational order, I too wish to be liberated." So you can't really separate the man from his time. To get Weber, we have to look at the world that shaped him, because his own life story, it's almost a perfect mirror of the incredible rise and fall of his nation, Germany.
Just look at this timeline. It's kind of wild. Weber's life from 1864 to 1920 almost exactly lines up with the German Second Reich. He's born right before it's unified. He sees it become this industrial giant, the #2 economic power in the world, and then he dies just as the whole thing lies in ruins after World War I. He saw the whole story from beginning to end.
And what's fascinating is that even when Germany was at its peak, Weber was sounding the alarm. He was super critical of Chancellor Bismarck's authoritarian style. He argued it was making German citizens politically, well, kind of passive and immature. He basically predicted that if Germans didn't learn how to lead themselves, it would all end in disaster. And tragically, he was spot on. So living through all this turbulence, seeing a nation rise and fall so dramatically, it led Weber to pose this huge world historical puzzle. But before he could answer the puzzle, he had to be really clear about what he was even asking. When Weber talked about the spirit of modern capitalism, he wasn't just talking about greed. I mean, greed's been around forever. No, he was talking about something very specific, something new. This rational, systematic, almost obsessive pursuit of profit, not just for fun, but as a kind of moral duty. And that brings us to his central question, the big one. Why did this unique system pop up only in the West? I mean, think about it. Other places had money, they had trade, they had banks. But this particular spirit, this calculated, disciplined drive, why did it only catch fire in Western Europe and North America? And the answer he came up with was, well, it was a total curveball. He didn't find the answer in economics, not in technology. He found it in religion, specifically in the deep-seated anxiety of a new kind of faith. So he basically compared two different paths to salvation. You had Catholicism, where the church gives you a roadmap, right? There's confession, good works. There are clear ways to get forgiveness. But then you have Calvinist Protestantism. And in that world, the church can't save you. You are completely and utterly alone before God. Okay, and the absolute key to this whole thing is a doctrine called predestination. Seriously, try to put yourself in this mindset. Imagine being taught from birth that God has already decided if you're going to heaven or hell before you were even born. And there is nothing, literally nothing, you can do to change it. The most terrifying part, you don't know which group you're in. This is where Weber's genius really shines. He saw this created a psychological chain reaction. First, you have this belief in predestination. That leads to just intense, unbearable anxiety. People are constantly asking themselves, am I one of the saved? Am I one of the damned? So what do? You start desperately looking for signs, any clue that you're one of God's chosen. And so here's the twist. Hard, disciplined work in your regular, everyday job suddenly becomes a religious calling. Why? Because worldly success could be seen as a sign of God's favor. But you couldn't just spend the money on luxuries. That would be a sin. Instead, you worked relentlessly and reinvested the profits to make even more profit, all to prove to yourself and everyone else that you were one of the saved. And boom, right there, Weber says, is the Protestant work ethic that fueled capitalism. So, let's talk about his legacy, because this idea was absolutely revolutionary, connecting a deep-seated religious anxiety directly to the rise of a global economic system. I mean, that's what made Weber a giant of modern thought. People started calling him the Karl Marx of the bourgeoisie. And it's a great nickname, actually. Because think about it. Marx explained the nuts and bolts of capitalism, the economics, the class struggle, but Weber came along and explained its spirit, its soul. He focused on the cultural and psychological reasons it all happened. So why should you care about any of this? Because Weber completely changed the game. He showed us that you can't separate economics from culture. Our financial systems are tied up with our deepest beliefs and anxieties. And what's just mind-blowing is that he wrote this masterpiece while recovering from a severe nervous breakdown that lasted for years. It was triggered by a huge fight with his father, who died shortly after. The book was, in a way, born from his own personal crisis. And that leaves us with a really big question for today. Weber's whole point was that this specific religious ethic got the whole engine started. But for many of us, that original religious fuel has burned away. The system, however, keeps on running. So you have to wonder, what's the spirit that drives our economy now? What are the invisible beliefs and anxieties that are pushing us forward today?
All right, today we are cracking open a really fascinating one. It's one of the most influential and, honestly, kind of weird books ever written. Max Weber's The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism.
At its core, this whole book is basically a detective story. It's trying to solve this one huge puzzle. How in the world did an ethic of extreme self-denial and religious piety end up creating the most powerful engine for making money the world has ever seen?
I mean, just look at these two columns. On one side, you have piety, asceticism, and rejecting worldly pleasure. On the other, profit, materialism, and a relentless pursuit of worldly stuff. They seem like total opposites, right? So how do you get from one to the other?
So let's dive into this sociological detective story. Weber starts his investigation by noticing something odd, a pattern. He looked around early modern Europe and saw that the business leaders, the owners of capital, the most successful people, they were overwhelmingly Protestant.
This leads him to the first major clue, and it's a big one. It's found in this revolutionary and frankly terrifying new religious idea that was being introduced by Protestant reformers like John Calvin.
The idea was called predestination, and it was a complete break from the past. It basically said that long before you were even born, God had already decided if you were going to heaven or hell. And get this, there was absolutely nothing you could do to change it. Your fate was sealed.
Can you just imagine the psychological weight of that? I mean, really. It created this deep, personal, gnawing anxiety inside every single believer. It forced them to constantly ask themselves this terrifying question: am I one of the chosen, or am I damned?
Okay, so you can't earn your salvation, but you're desperate to know where you stand. So what do? Well, you start looking for signs. You look for proof that you're one of the good ones. And this desperate search for clues is our next piece of the puzzle, and it completely changed how people thought about work.
Work wasn't just a way to pay the bills anymore. No, it was transformed into a divine calling. Your job, whether you are a baker or a banker, was a duty given to you by God. And performing that duty with methodical, relentless, disciplined hard work, that became the highest possible moral activity you could do. It was a way to bring glory to God. Now, Weber points to someone like Benjamin Franklin as the poster child for this new spirit of capitalism. Think about a phrase like time is money. We say it all the time, right? But for Franklin, this wasn't just a business tip, it was a moral statement. Wasting time wasn't just unproductive, it was a sin. Accumulating wealth wasn't about greed, it was a sign of your moral character. Okay, so let's put the clues on the table.
We have this deep, deep anxiety about being saved. And we have this new religious duty to just work tirelessly in your calling. Now let's see how Weber cracks the case.
And here it is, the psychological engine of capitalism. See how it works? You're anxious, so you work like crazy in your calling. That hard work often leads to economic success. You then interpret that success as a sign from God that you're one of the chosen, which eases your anxiety. But here's the kicker. Your strict ascetic faith says you can't spend that money on fun stuff or luxuries. So what do you do with all that profit?
There was only one logical, religiously approved thing to do. You reinvested it. You poured it right back into the business to make it bigger, more efficient, more profitable. And this created a powerful, self-perpetuating cycle of capital accumulation. So there it is. The paradox is solved. Religious self-denial accidentally became the fuel for the engine of modern capitalism.
But, like any good detective story, there's a final twist. And it's a dark one. Weber argues that once this incredibly powerful capitalist machine was built and set in motion, well, it didn't need its religious spark anymore. The deep spiritual anxiety, the search for salvation, all of that faded away over time. But the economic system it created? That remained. And it started running on its own powerful internal logic, a logic that we are all born into, whether we like it or not.
Weber had a famous name for this condition, the iron cage. The drive to work, to be efficient, to accumulate, it's no longer a spiritual choice we make to find signs of salvation. For us, it's just a structural necessity. We're forced to play the game simply to survive within the system. And Weber warned that living in this cage produces a very specific, new kind of human being. He described this person with a truly haunting phrase. He saw us becoming specialists without spirit, cogs in a vast economic machine, experts in our tiny little fields, but with no sense of the bigger picture or a deeper purpose. And at the same time, sensualists without heart, people who pursue pleasure, sure, but in a mechanical way, without real passion or a deeper sense of meaning. So this detective story that's over a century old leaves us staring right in the mirror. It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. Are we these final humans that Weber foresaw? It's pretty wild to think that what started as a desperate, passionate search for eternal salvation ended up building an iron cage, a system that now shapes our daily lives, our work, and even who we are, in ways its creators could never, ever have imagined.